For most of my life, I have worked as a police officer in Montana. I still wear the badge today. Being a cop is not easy. Some people call us names like pig, bastard, or worse. In 2020, with all the protests and riots, it felt like the whole world hated us. Protesters carried signs that said AKB, which stands for all cops are bastards. It hurt, but I tried not to take it personally. I didn't always want this job. I never dreamed of being a police officer, but life doesn't always go as planned. College wasn't for me, and I needed a stable job, so I signed up for the academy. Over the years, I've seen things that made me want to quit. But there was one night, one moment that almost broke me completely. It was April 2014, a cold, quiet night. I was patrolling the back roads near the edge of town. The streets were empty, the kind of silence that puts you on edge. Suddenly, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, swerving wildly. The car sped past me, nearly clipping the front of my cruiser. My heart jumped. I turned on my lights and sirens and pulled the car over. As I walked up to the driver's window, I noticed there were 4 people in the car. A red sedan that looked like it had seen better days. The driver, a man in his 30s, was sweating and shaking. His hands trembled as he held them up, just like I'd ordered. "Driver's license and registration," I said firmly, but inside I was tense. Something felt wrong. The driver handed over his license. His name was Richard Ramirez. My stomach dropped. The name matched a suspect in a robbery and shooting from the night before. Dispatch had warned us about him. A dangerous man, possibly armed. I stepped back to my cruiser, keeping an eye on the car. I radioed for backup and waited, my hand resting on my gun. When I returned to the car, Richard was fidgeting, his hand inching toward his pocket. "Keep your hands where I can see them," I shouted, my voice sharp, but he didn't listen. Instead, he pulled something out of his pocket. My instincts screamed, "Danger!" In that split second, I thought it was a gun. I fired. The sound of the gunshots echoed in the cold night air. Richard slumped forward, groaning, but still alive. The passengers in the car froze, their hands up, fear written all over their faces. "Everyone out! Hands on the ground!" I barked. The 2 passengers in the back scrambled out, obeying my commands. The 4th person in the front passenger seat hesitated, their face pale. Now I shouted, my voice shaking but firm. They finally complied. I handcuffed the 3 of them and secured them in the back of my cruiser. But my focus was on Richard. Backup arrived minutes later, their flashing lights painting the scene in red and blue. I approached the car cautiously, my gun still drawn. Richard wasn't moving anymore. I opened the driver's door and checked his pulse. It was faint. I reached into his pocket to see what he had been pulling out. It wasn't a gun. It was a small plastic bag of meth. My heart sank. I staggered back, the weight of what I'd done crashing down on me. I had fired on instinct, and now a man was dying because of it. Richard was pronounced dead at the scene. I sat in my cruiser, staring at the dashboard, trying to process what had just happened. Another officer approached me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You did what you had to do," he said quietly. But his words felt hollow. That night, I went home and sat in the dark for hours. My mind replayed the moment Richard reached for his pocket. The flash of my gun, the sound of the shots over and over, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. A few weeks later, Richard's family filed a lawsuit against me. They claimed I had used excessive force and that Richard wasn't a threat. The media got hold of the story and soon my face was on the news. People online called me a murderer. Death threats poured in. "Pig, you deserve to rot in hell." I tried to ignore it, but the guilt was unbearable. I started to wonder if they were right. The trial was long and draining. My department stood by me, saying I had followed protocol. The judge eventually cleared me of all charges, ruling that I had acted in self-defense. But even with the legal system on my side, the court of public opinion had already made up its mind. Months passed, but the incident haunted me. I began questioning every decision I made on the job. One night, while patrolling the same area where the shooting happened, I noticed a car following me. At first, I thought it was just another driver, but the car stayed behind me, turning down every road I did. I radioed dispatch. "This is Officer 327. I think I've got a tail," requesting backup. But before backup could arrive, the car sped up, pulling alongside my cruiser. The driver rolled down his window. It was a young man, his face twisted with rage. "You killed my brother, you bastard," he shouted, throwing something at my car. It hit the windshield with a loud thunk. I didn't have time to react before he swerved his car toward mine, trying to run me off the road. My adrenaline kicked in. I hit the gas, trying to create distance between us. The backup arrived just in time and sirens were blaring. The man sped off, disappearing into the night. We never caught him, but the message was clear. Richard's death wasn't just a news story to some people. It was personal. The months after that encounter were some of the darkest of my life. I thought about quitting and even about ending it all. One night, I found myself sitting in my living room with my service weapon in my lap. Its weight was heavy, both physically and mentally. But then I thought about my family, my friends, the people who still depended on me. I realized that giving up wasn't the answer. I decided to seek help. I started seeing a therapist, someone who could help me process the trauma. It wasn't easy, but it was a step in the right direction. It's been years since that night in 2014. I still think about Richard sometimes. I wonder if there was another way, something I could have done differently. But I also know that in this job, split-second decisions can mean life or death. Before we dive into the next story, if you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell icon to stay updated with our upcoming scary stories. Your support means the world to us, so please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks. When I moved to the city, everything felt overwhelming. It was my first time living on my own, and I didn't have much money. The apartment I found was cheap, but it came with a catch. I needed to share it with a roommate. I didn't know anyone in the area, so I turned to the internet. That's how I met Martin. Martin responded to my ad quickly. His emails were polite, straightforward, and maybe a little dry. He said he was between jobs and needed a place to stay. He didn't ask many questions, which I liked. I just wanted someone quiet who wouldn't bother me. Martin seemed perfect. The first time I met him in person, he looked normal. He was tall and thin with short brown hair and glasses that made him look older than he probably was. His handshake was firm, but awkward, like he wasn't used to meeting new people. He moved in the next day with just a couple of bags and a big beat-up duffel. First, everything seemed fine. Martin kept to himself. He spent a lot of time in his room, which was just down the hall from mine. He'd close the door and stay in there for hours. I didn't hear much from him except for the occasional cough or the sound of his computer keyboard clicking late at night. He didn't have a lot of stuff and the apartment stayed clean. We didn't talk much, just good morning or see you later when we passed each other. Honestly, I thought I'd hit the jackpot with such an easygoing roommate. But then things started to feel off. The first strange thing I noticed was the locks. Martin always locked his bedroom door, even if he was just stepping out to grab a drink from the kitchen. It didn't bother me at first. I figured he was private. But then I realized he had added extra locks to his door, ones I hadn't noticed when he first moved in. There were 3 now. The regular door knob lock, a chain lock, and a heavy deadbolt. I joked about it once, saying, "You hiding gold in there or something?" Martin didn't laugh. He just stared at me, his expression blank, and said, "I like to feel secure." A couple of weeks later, I noticed the duffel bag again. It was always in the corner of his room near the door. Sometimes when he thought I wasn't around, he'd open it and rifle through it quickly, like he was checking to make sure everything was still there. Once I saw him pull out a black ski mask. He didn't notice me watching from the hallway. I didn't ask about it. Something about the way he carried himself made me nervous. He wasn't aggressive, but there was tension in the air when he was around, like a rubber band stretched too tight. I told myself I was just imagining things, but I started to feel uneasy. The noises began a week after I saw the ski mask. Late at night, when I was lying in bed, I'd hear him moving around in his room. It wasn't just the sound of typing or footsteps. Sometimes it sounded like he was pacing, Other times, I'd hear strange scraping noises, like he was dragging something heavy across the floor. Once I woke up to the sound of him muttering. His voice was low and frantic, like he was arguing with someone. I couldn't make out the words, but it didn't sound like he was on the phone. When I asked him about it the next morning, he shrugged and said, "I must have been talking in my sleep." The longer Martin stayed, the more paranoid he became. He started asking weird questions, like if I'd seen anyone hanging around the building or if I'd noticed strange cars parked on the street. Once he asked if the apartment had a security camera. I told him no, and he looked relieved. He also started leaving the apartment at odd hours. Sometimes I'd hear the front door open at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning. He never said where he was going, and I didn't ask. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. One night I came home from work and found the apartment darker than usual. Martin's bedroom door was closed and the hallway smelled faintly of sweat and something metallic. I knocked on his door, but he didn't answer. I felt a pang of anxiety as I walked past his room to get to mine. My eyes caught the faint glow of light under his door and I realized he was in there. He just didn't want to talk. The next day I decided to snoop. I know I shouldn't have, but curiosity got the better of me. Martin had left for one of his late-night outings, and his bedroom door was locked as usual. I bent down and tried to peek through the keyhole. All I could see was a sliver of his room, a desk, a chair, and what looked like stacks of papers. That's when I noticed the sound. Faint, almost imperceptible, like the hum of an old machine. I couldn't explain why, but I backed away from the door and went to my room, locking it behind me. Everything came crashing down a week later. I was in the kitchen making coffee when there was a knock at the door. Before I could answer it, the door burst open and men in tactical gear stormed in, shouting orders for me to get on the ground. My heart was pounding as I dropped to my knees, my hands above my head. "Where's Martin?" One of them barked. I stammered something about his room and they moved past me, kicking the door open. Martin didn't even fight. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, his hands resting on his knees as if he'd been waiting for them. After they took Martin away, I stood in the hallway staring into his room. The cops had left the door open, and for the first time, I saw what he'd been hiding. The walls were covered in maps, photos, and handwritten notes. There were blueprints of what looked like a bank marked with arrows and X's. His desk was piled high with cash, bundles of it wrapped in rubber bands. In the corner of the room, the duffel bag sat open, revealing more money along with gloves and tools that looked like they belonged in a heist movie. Later, I learned that Martin had been part of a gang that had robbed a bank a few months before he moved in. The police had been tracking him for weeks, waiting for the right moment to make their move. They found evidence in his room that tied him directly to the robbery, along with documents that hinted he was planning another one. I couldn't believe I'd been living with someone like that. Every little thing, his locked door, the ski mask, the pacing, suddenly made sense. I moved out of the apartment the next day. Even now, I sometimes wonder if Martin would have stayed longer if the police hadn't caught him. Would he have left quietly one night, slipping away like a ghost? Or would I have woken up to find him gone? The apartment empty except for that strange metallic smell in the air? I guess I'll never know. I had always been proud of my work ethic, even if it meant pulling late hours at the office. As a manager at the company, it was my responsibility to ensure everything ran smoothly, and tonight had been one of those nights where nothing seemed to go as planned. By the time I locked up and left, the clock was inching closer to midnight. The roads were eerily quiet as I drove home, a stark contrast to the bustling office I had just left. My car hummed steadily, the headlights cutting through the darkness of the deserted highway. I had taken this route to avoid the city's chaotic traffic, but now the endless stretches of trees on either side felt suffocating. As I drove, the gas light on my dashboard flickered to life, a soft orange glow that immediately tightened my chest. I cursed under my breath. I had meant to fill up earlier, but had been too preoccupied with the chaos at work. Just a little further, I muttered to myself. Surely there'd be a gas station soon. But luck wasn't on my side that night. The car began to sputter, the engine coughing in protest before falling silent. The vehicle coasted to a stop, leaving me stranded on the side of the road in near total darkness. I sighed, frustrated, but trying to stay calm. I reached for my phone to call for help, but when I pressed the power button, nothing happened. The screen remained dark. Dead battery, of course, I muttered, leaning back against the seat. The silence outside was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the woods. I locked the doors out of habit, my mind already spinning with possibilities of what to do. Minutes passed, maybe it was half an hour. I couldn't tell anymore. I sat there staring at the road ahead, hoping for another car to pass. But the highway was abandoned, swallowed by the night. Then I saw movement. Something stirred in the bushes to my left. I leaned forward, squinting through the window, my pulse quickening. A man stepped out from the shadows. He was tall and thin, his clothes tattered and filthy. His hair was wild, his face partially obscured by the gloom. "Hey there," he called out, his voice rough and growly. I didn't respond. He walked closer, his hands raised as if to show he meant no harm. But there was something in his posture, something in his grin that set my nerves on edge. "Car trouble?" he asked, stopping just a few feet from my driver's side window. I shook my head, not wanting to engage. "I can help," he said, his grin widening. "Got some tools back there?" He gestured vaguely toward the woods. I shook my head again, mouthing the words, "I'm fine." His expression darkened for a moment before he plastered the grin back on. "Suit yourself," he said, stepping back, "but it's a long walk to the nearest gas station." I thought he might leave, but instead he disappeared into the bushes again. Relief washed over me briefly, but it didn't last long. I heard a metallic clinking sound. My breath caught in my throat. The man emerged again, this time holding a steel rod. His grin was gone, replaced with a cold, calculating stare. He walked back to my car, raising the rod slightly before knocking on my window with it. "Open up," he said, his tone now menacing. I froze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. "Come on," he said, knocking harder. "Don't make this difficult." My mind raced. I didn't know what he wanted, but I knew I couldn't let him inside. I stayed silent, hoping he'd lose interest and leave. He didn't. The knocking grew louder, more aggressive. The sound of metal against glass echoed in the stillness, sending a jolt of fear through me. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, headlights appeared in the distance. Car was approaching. My heart leaped as the vehicle slowed and I saw it was a police cruiser. The man noticed the lights too. His head snapped toward the approaching car, and for a moment he stood frozen. Then, without warning, he bolted, disappearing into the woods with the steel rod still in hand. The police car pulled up behind mine and two officers stepped out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Is everything okay here?" one of them asked, his beam shining directly on my window. I unlocked the door and practically stumbled out, my words tumbling over each other as I explained what had happened. The officers exchanged a glance before heading toward the woods. "Stay by the car," one of them instructed. I nodded, too shaken to do anything else. The woods seemed alive with sound as the officers moved through them, their flashlights bouncing off the trees. Minutes later, I heard shouting. The officers reappeared, dragging the man between them. He was thrashing, trying to break free, but they had him restrained. They searched him and found stolen items in his pockets. A wallet, car keys, and a pocket knife. "This guy's been causing trouble," one of the officers said, showing me the stolen goods. "We've had reports of break-ins around here. Looks like he's been hiding out, waiting for easy targets." I nodded, my legs still trembling. The officers placed the man in the back of their cruiser and assured me he'd be taken care of. "You're out of gas?" the officer asked. "Yes," I said, my voice shaky. "I'll give you a lift to a station," he said. "You can call for a tow from there." I thanked him, my gratitude overwhelming. As we drove away, I glanced back at my car, now swallowed by the darkness of the highway. The forest loomed on either side, silent once more. The officer must have noticed my expression. "Lucky we came by when we did," he said. I nodded, though the word lucky didn't quite fit. The thought of what could have happened if they hadn't arrived made me uneasy. Since that night, I've never driven home without double-checking my gas tank or charging my phone. The memory of the man's grin, his steel rod tapping against the glass, stays with me. A reminder of just how quickly an ordinary night can turn into a nightmare.